Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This month of December, we are talking about exertion, which, given the weather and everything, feels oddly timed, I admit, because a lot of us want to get cozy. But exertion in the Buddhist tradition is actually more based in going beyond our hesitation as a way to show up and open our heart to others. So there's a sense of open-heartedness, which I would say this particular holiday season is certainly about, or at least intended to be about, although we often get it confused. So, I want to talk about exertion just for a minute, and then we're going to get into there's only two mind training slogans in Atisha's songbook, so to speak, that actually cover exertion. But the idea here is that we have a tendency to want to hide our heart, to want to shut down and just look out for number one. That doesn't get us very far, and I think many people watching this already know that. I think we know in our heart of hearts that when we only focus on me and my issues, we're going to spiral from one thing to another to another. Today's stressful situation is different than next week's, which is different than a month from now. But there's always going to be something that's going to stress us out or give us fear. And if we only spend our mental energy on that, it's actually going to be quite exhausting. So exertion is asking us to say, can you go beyond just thinking about that? And it's actually quite liberating when we actually rouse ourselves to do so. So we say, hey, instead of just thinking about me and my thing, what's going on around me? What? It doesn't even have to be like the big news story. It can be, as I'm walking the dog, I notice my neighbors, right? It's exerting ourselves beyond our habitual tendency to only think about me and my thing, to raise our gaze and involve our world and say, oh, there's so much going on. There might be ways for me to show up, not necessarily in some big heroic fashion, but even to just smile to that neighbor. And that's an act of compassion, right? So we're looking for ways that we can join a sense of open-heartedness with overcoming our own levels of stress and anxiety. Now, there are 5 aspects that I want to cover today that our friend Atisha back in the 11th century detailed. And it's a very pith slogan, or 2 very pith slogans, that relate to these very complex 5 things. So I'm just going to dive right into it right now. Okay. The idea here, slogan number 17, we're only 17 in out of the 59, which is phenomenal. It says, train your mind, practice the 5 strengths. Okay. We want to train the mind. That's all we've been doing in meditation, right? All we've been doing is sitting here acknowledging when the mind drifts off, coming back, warming up the heart through loving kindness, looking directly at our emotions through practices like rain. So we've been training the mind, but what does it mean to train the mind through practicing the 5 strengths? I'm going to break down the 5 strengths. These are 5 types of energizing factors that enable us to practice being open and compassionate in the rest of our life. Okay, number 1, I'm just going to list them and then I'm going to go through them. 1 is determination. 2 is familiarization. 3 is virtue. 4 is reproach, or sometimes referred to as remorse. And 5 is aspiration. We may not normally think of these things as strengths, but we can think of them as energizing factors if you hate that term strengths. Either is fine. Let's talk about how to practice determination. So determination in the Buddhist understanding is to actually set an intention and to be able to mindfully stick to it. This can be like an intention for our life. It can be an intention for our work. It can be an intention for our relationship. It can be an intention for our day. But the idea of determination, that we remain steadfast in living the life that we actually want to consciously create. This isn't I speak my aspiration to the universe and the universe showers me with blessings sort of thing. It's like a work thing of, hey, I want to show up. I'll give a specific example. When I sat there, or when I stood there with my wife at our wedding day, I committed vows. I said certain things that I was going to do, and a lot of them were based in qualities, ways that I was going to show up for this person. Maybe it was to be patient or to be kind, these certain things. I believe both of those were in there. So it's the guy who should probably go ahead and reopen those vows and study them. There's the idea that there's certain things that I determined was important to me in this relationship, And having set that intention, I need to continue to stick with it, right? So that's one version of it. We could say in my work, we get so mired in the idea of like, what do I need to do today for work? Well, I've got these sorts of meetings, and then that's going to be stressful, and blah, blah. A way to rouse ourselves beyond the anxiety and the daily stress is to say, what's my intention for the work overall? The work can be any number of things. I mean, it doesn't have to be this particular job that I hold or this particular position, but like the work of my lifetime. I remember a number of years ago, I was doing a lot. I was doing too many things. And it was early on in my relationship with my wife, and the two of us locked ourselves up in a cabin together in upstate New York. And we were on something of a meditation retreat together for an extended period of time. I want to say a month, 2 months, something like that. It was something ridiculous early on that in a relationship. And one day I just said, all right, listen, I need to get my act together. And I wrote out everything that I did for a living. I was writing for this mainstream magazine. I was writing for these Buddhist things. I was, meeting with these sorts of meditation students. I was teaching at that place, and I was doing, there were so many different things that were happening all at once. And also new opportunities that were coming up. And I wrote them all down on these 8.5, 11 by sheets of paper. I put them all on the wall, and I just stood there and I stared at them, and I started rearranging them. And when I took just one or two things off the wall that my gut was saying, oh, maybe not that, I said, oh, so the work that I do is making meditation accessible to people. Once I had that sort of intention, the work that I do is making meditation accessible to people, then everything that came out felt like an organic, even though there were still, to this day, there's a dozen things that I do, but they all relate only to that thing. So there's an intention, and I'm determined to stick to that intention, and that helps guide the work and gives me energy for it. So not to make it all about me, but I wanted to use that as an example for what is the intention for your work? What is the intention for the relationship you're in, or relationships, your friendships? What is the intention for how you cultivate family values? What is the intention for today? And that is the most microcosm and probably practical application of we wake up in the morning, could we set an intention for the day? Today I want to be generous. I know I've got all these things that are going to ask a lot of me. I'm going to see how generous I can be. That's my intention, to be generous. At the end of the day, we reflect back and we say, how did that go? Maybe there are only 2 times that you were generous, but you can feel good about that and celebrate that. And know that you can wake up tomorrow and the intention can remain the same or be brand new, but you can start fresh and do it again. So as a daily practice, that might even be of interest to you if you're curious and exploring this idea of determination. But I think even just saying, as I've been talking about these different aspects of your life, you might have a hunch of, I really want to sit down and see what my intention is for this part of my life, my social life, my romantic life, my work life, what you name it. And then actually the Buddhist notion here is we determine that we're going to stick with it. And it's not we can do the practice as a daily thing, but what we're really going to be doing here is looking at it over the course of our life. Can we remain determined, in particular, to these intentions over the course of years and decades? The idea behind it is that more often than not, when we zoom out from the daily experience, we might actually have a sense of, a lot of it comes down to either taking care of ourselves and or taking care of others. Often that's where it ends up, when we zoom out from a very big perspective. And to determine that is the sense of opening our heart, right? We're opening our heart to ourselves and others. So that's the idea of determination. The second is familiarization. This is another strength that we can have, another energizing factor. Familiarization is the process of actually getting to know ourselves fully. And that means that we're becoming familiar, yes, with some of the parts of ourselves that experience peace and joy. And we become familiar with the parts of ourselves that are a little edgy. Parts of ourselves that we don't necessarily want to look at. The parts of ourselves that are confused. The parts of ourselves that probably, have every right to be justified and right in this argument, but also maybe not, right? We get to know all of it. And it's becoming really, really familiar with a friend. The more time we spend with a friend, the more we get to know them, the more we know their quirks, the more we know how they might react in a certain situation. But here we're spending that time with ourselves. So doubling down on the meditation practice is a really important thing to do, meaning that we don't let the holidays and the busyness of the new year start to sway us, but that we say, This is a time for me to get serious about my practice and to really become more familiar with myself in the midst of all the busyness. The idea is that we practice mindfulness and even loving kindness practices often so it becomes such familiar territory that it's not like a big deal or something that we need to cultivate anymore. It's like a part of who we are. We become a mindful and a loving person. That's the goal, right? We don't do meditation so that we become, a lot of the science around it's like, well, you're going to boost your immune system and it's going to normalize your sleep patterns. Fine, that's like a side effect. I don't think anyone at this stage is like, I just need to sleep better and that's all I meditate for. No, it's like we have a sense that this is going to infiltrate our worldview, that we're going to live a more mindful and loving life if we actually do these practices. So the more we familiarize ourselves with the practice, the more it just becomes naturally a part of who we are and not something that we need to do or generate. Okay, hopefully that's clear. The third is virtue. Virtue is such an interesting term because I worry that when I talk about it, people are going to be like, oh, he's going to give me the 10 commandments of Buddhism, and that doesn't exist. I mean, there's all sorts of like rules for monastics that range from, not taking life all the way over to don't walk into tall grass wearing the monastic skirts, because there were monks at the time who were pleasuring themselves by wandering into these tall grasses wearing nothing underneath their skirts. The Buddha actually had to decree, anyway, you get it. Like, there's some things that might feel very relevant, some things that feel not so relevant in the whole monastic canon, and the precepts and vows that are associated with that. But in terms of virtue, as us householders, it's the term that is often used. Instead of being monastics, we are householders. We are practitioners who have jobs and families and homes and lives and things like that. The idea of virtue here is that we do things from a place of being in line with our own moral heart, our own noble compass. The Tibetan word would be ninje, N-Y-I-N-J-E, which can mean noble heart. It's also a term referring to compassion, but there's some sense of like, can we actually align ourselves from that place of openness and act in accordance with that, as opposed to acting from a place of fear and shutdownness? That's the idea of virtue. Like when we zoom out again, that's the idea of virtue. Not don't do this, only do that. It's, are we acting from a place of open-heartedness? Are we acting from a place of fear? This is an honest to God question that I recommend asking yourself on a regular basis. Am I acting from a place of openness, or am I acting from a place of fear? Sometimes when we poke at ourselves and we say, oh gosh, maybe I am acting from a place of fear. I don't want to do that. And it might just be the thing that we need to not send that email, to not immediately react in that way, whatever it might be. So we're committing to being of benefit to ourselves and to others. Trungpa Rinpoche, who is an incredible Tibetan Buddhist teacher, one of those last greats, he said, we do what is good, meaningful, and wholesome in our physical actions. So it's everything, every action we do is ideally coming from that place of openness that's good and meaningful and wholesome, and what those words mean to us is what they mean to us. That's the important thing. So through our body, speech, and mind, we're always trying to act in good, wholesome, meaningful ways. That's the idea of virtue. 4, reproach or remorse. The idea here isn't that we wallow in guilt for everything that we did from 10 years ago or whatever. It's the idea that we give up our egoic mistakes, the ways that we shut down and hold ourselves back from actually experiencing reality as it is. And we treasure, the idea is that we treasure our ideas and our opinions of ourselves so much that maybe we need to let some of them go. Maybe if we emptied out some of the concepts that we held so tightly about ourselves, that we are only this job title, or we are only this half of this relationship, would we actually find some sense of energy, some sense of liberation because of that? Again, these are energizing factors. Maybe there is something to be found in our ego and the way that we create our solid sense of self and me, and who I am and what I think about myself. And I want everyone to think that about me too. If we let go of some of that, we might actually have more energy to engage with an open heart. So letting go of some of the habitual tendencies that hold us back from reality and hold us back from connection. That's the idea here. And 5 is, there's a quote. The Buddhist teacher Judy Leaf said, you recognize that it is your fascination with yourself or your ego fixation that causes you so much suffering and keeps you from developing loving kindness and compassion. You don't try to pretend otherwise. You're willing to reproach the ego and are determined to tame it and undermine its power. So for people who are unfamiliar with what I mean by this, it's like it's us getting out of our own way. We're getting out of like our own head, our own habitual patterns, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, so that we might actually find some sense of liberation. Okay, 5 is aspiration. Aspiration here means that we can aspire to attain complete awakening. Complete awakening. And like not actually shy away from the concept of enlightenment and attaining nirvana and being completely wakeful. Aspiration is the aspire to attain complete awakening and to cultivate loving kindness and compassion in order to be of benefit to beings. That's the big aspiration. Like underneath all of the various activities we do in our life, what's the aspiration? The aspiration might just be not just to take care of me and my thing, but to be of benefit to others, to come at it from a place of open-heartedness. Can we aspire to be of benefit over the course of our lifetime? And part of that means that we wake up to the present moment to such an extent that we can really help others. That is a big aspiration. And that when we make that aspiration, you can either make that aspiration in your own words when you wake up in the morning, or when you feel particularly stuck, you can make an aspiration to be of benefit to others. There's lots of traditional phrases in terms of like awakening our open heart. That might even be inspiring to you. But the idea is that when we live from that place of an aspiration, of being of benefit to all and waking up, we feel liberated, we feel energized. It strengthens our connection to reality and to our ability to connect to others. So those are the 5. So to summarize, we can actually transform our behavior into meaningful, wonderful, powerful behavior through the course of these 5. Determination, familiarization, virtue, remorse or reproach, and aspiration. Now, the second of these slogans, so we just did slogan 17, that's all slogan 17. Atisha really packs a punch in these 2 slogans around exertion. The second way that we would offer exertion is at the time of death. So slogan 18 is the Mahayana instruction for ejection of consciousness at death is the 5 strengths. How you conduct yourself is important. Confusing. Mahayana. Maha means greater. Yana would be vehicle, so it's the greater vehicle, the open-hearted vehicle, the vehicle that's based in compassion and emptiness. So the idea is the instruction from this particular school of Buddhism, of being open-hearted, is that when we encounter death, we would, the way that we conduct ourselves is incredibly important, and the instruction that we're being given is to actually eject consciousness with an idea of these 5 strengths that I just went through. Still confusing, right? Don't worry, I'm going to break it down. It is said that when we die, the body that we have been inhabiting as in a consciousness, all of a sudden it's gone and the consciousness is free to go travel to other realms and all of that. It's supposed to be an extremely confusing time. That is the traditional point of view. Do I, Lodro Rinsler, validate that is exactly what happens? I do not know. I have not died recently. So I don't have memory of this. I can't just say, yes, this is what happens. But this is the traditional teaching that I'm offering. That it said that our consciousness is ejected from the body. And it's very confusing because we've always thought of ourselves as this body, right? So now we don't have it, we're looking down, we're like, what's going on? And then we start to, familiarize ourselves with like all the people around us that, we normally associate with. And then we say, why are they not interacting with me? And then we get shut off into the various realms. It's a whole thing. And I'm not going to break down, there are lots of books if anyone's genuinely curious about what the ejection of consciousness and the time of death is supposed to be like according to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I can recommend some books. Promise. But I want to talk about the idea of preparing the mind for death from these place of the 5 strengths. So the 5 strengths, again, 1, determination. The idea is that over the course of our lifetime, how we conduct ourselves is important, and how we conduct ourselves is actually bringing ourselves to a place of presence, wakefulness, over and over again. So when we do encounter death, we approach it from a place of bravery and conviction that we can approach death from that same place of being open and awake. The more time we spend in our lifetime doing that, the more we are able to approach dying and death from that place of I can be brave, I can be present, I can be whole, I can be complete as is. We can determine that. We can make a strong determination for that over the course of a lifetime. 2, familiarization. Familiarization, the idea of developing mindfulness and awareness in the course of our life means that we are so familiar with how to hold our seat in the midst of incredibly difficult circumstances that when something really big like death happens, we're still holding our seat. We have familiarized ourselves with the practice to the extent that we're still able to remain grounded and whole and present. 3, virtue. Virtue here is the idea of overcoming attachment to this life. We become so attached not only to our fixed ideas of who we are and our thing and that we've talked about just before, but at the time of death, we're so attached to our idea of our life, our body, our belongings. We can let some of that go and allow even the fear of death to propel us into virtuous conduct over the course of our life. We don't know the time of death. It comes without warning. But we can say, well, it means that I want to prepare my body, my speech, my activity, my mind for this inevitability. And part of that is actually acting in a virtuous way over the course of my life. So how you conduct yourself is important, means literally conducting ourselves from that place of meaningfulness in preparation for death. 4, reproach or remorse. Here, the thing that we are giving up is the idea of a solid sense of me. Solid sense of me and my thing. Me as Lodro, me as author, me as teacher, me as husband, me as dog owner, like all of the various identities that I have, we start to let the identities go, the labels that we put on ourselves, so we can just view the reality as it is, which is an excellent preparation for death. And 5, aspiration, that we would live fully in line with our bodhicitta over the course of our life, again, as preparation for that moment when we do end up dying, that we die with from a place of open-heartedness. So bodhi, open or awake, citta, heart or mind, the sense of open-heartedness, awake mind, that we can actually cultivate in any given moment over the course of this very day, so that when we do approach death, we actually approach it from that place. Death is a very scary concept, I realize. It's one of the slogans, so I did want to talk about it. But the idea here is not that we should get so bowled over and say, oh my God, I didn't realize I was going to die. But to actually say, oh, there are ways for me to prepare my mind and body, not only to have a good life, which is the first slogan that we covered, but also to have a good death, which is the second one that we just covered. All of this is, of course, enmeshed in the idea of exerting ourselves over the course of today, this week, this month, this decade, this lifetime, so that we live a life that we feel really good about. That's the bottom line. No one in this community says, I just sort of want to again, boost my immune system by all this. It's like, no, we want to live a meaningful life. Life is short and we want to make the most of it. And these are 5 ways that can actually help us cultivate a awake mind and open heart so that we feel really good about a meaningful life. I hope this has been helpful for you, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts when next we meet. Take care.